Okay, good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us for an important issue that we need to talk about. Now, in our city, we know it's the time for the holidays where many of us are excited about, whether it's Christmas or Hanukkah, other festivities that we do during this time of year. And we know it's a time for many of love and joy and so forth, all the things that we cherish about the holidays. But we do want to highlight today, unfortunately, I think the other side of the holidays, another side that has been around for a long time. But what we saw around Thanksgiving is that there is absolutely a need for city leadership, including myself, including the chief of police, and our community to be aware of domestic violence issues in general, but specifically also during the holidays. So that's what we're going to speak about today. Now, we are going to highlight a couple of programs that we're working on to try and reduce domestic violence, especially some additional training and usage of collateral officers to be able to respond to these calls. You may remember that over Thanksgiving we saw the highest call volume in recent memory for domestic violence over the Thanksgiving holiday. Now, we know that this is terrible and tragic in many ways because domestic violence is it's an issue in its own right, but it's also what it leads to that we want to remind everyone. When you mix in perhaps substance abuse, perhaps a weapon, this is when domestic violence also becomes deadly. And when you think about our homicide rate and the violent crime in Albuquerque, a huge percentage is correlated to an initial instance of domestic violence. So it's the intersection of domestic violence and firearms and substance abuse, and of course the drivers of that, whether it's poverty and all sorts of different issues, but that is what is also driving violence in Albuquerque. So today we're going to talk specifically about some of the projects that we're working on that. Next week we're also going to talk about, at a higher level, how to help victims, how to reduce some of the causes of domestic violence. But today is about law enforcement. It's about law enforcement trying to do what we can to prevent domestic violence from becoming life-ending. So we know that many people, too, who are engaged in domestic violence, they're often involved in a long-term situation. We understand that, and that's often what makes it so difficult. So we are going to explicitly talk about what to look for, what resources there are that are available. But we also know the holidays is a rare opportunity for individuals who are in a relationship that involves domestic violence. It's a rare opportunity sometimes for them to reach out to help, to get help, whether it's from family or from their friends, in ways that often they're unable to do because of either the restrictions or the threats that they're under in their own household. And so while we know this is a dangerous time for some folks, this also can be a time when you can finally get out of that long-term terrible relationship and situation. Now, we're going to hear from a number of folks at the city who are experts on this, and we're going to start off with our own domestic violence specialist, or domestic violence czar, a position that we created a couple of years ago coming out of some task force work, and we're grateful to have her at the city, Inez Roybal. Inez?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mayor Keller, and everyone in attendance for standing here today in recognition of the need to prevent and intervene domestic violence as a high priority for the city of Albuquerque. My name is Isis Roybal, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the coordinator of domestic violence and gender-based violence prevention. Domestic violence is a pattern of behavior which establishes power and control over an intimate partner within a family by use of fear, manipulation, control, or isolation. Intimate partner domestic violence comes in many forms. It can be physical, sexual, emotional, financial, or including other abusive behavior. Domestic violence impacts everyone, millions of people in the U.S. each year. Victims can be of any age, cultural or racial background, gender and sexual orientation, or financial level. Here in New Mexico, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 7 men will experience severe domestic violence in their lifetime. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, domestic violence incidents in Albuquerque increased by 8%, and those on the front lines saw an increase in strangulation. This is important because those survivors of strangulation are 750% more likely to die at the hands of their abusers. Every statistic is a story. Domestic violence is real, it's a public health issue, and it's an alarming crime in our community. But gaps can be identified, services can be improved, funding can be increased, and domestic violence can be prevented. The city has stepped up and developed several strategies to prevent and reduce sexual and domestic violence. In 2019, Mayor Keller created a 2-year domestic violence task force made up of many of the people here today, members from the advocacy community, APD, and survivors of domestic violence. As the coordinator of domestic violence and gender-based violence prevention, I am committed to carrying out the applicable recommendations made by the 2019 task force, and I will actively turn to this community to meet their needs. I'll continue to improve coordination between city departments and community agencies, champion effective changes to city and state policies, and advocate for funding to fill gaps in domestic violence and sexual assault services. I'll also be working with the newest formed commission at the City of Albuquerque, which is dedicated to addressing and decreasing the rate of domestic and sexual violence occurring in our community. With the unanimous support of the Albuquerque City Council on December 5th, we were able to pass an ordinance creating the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Commission. It was written based upon a central recommendation made by the 2019 Domestic Violence Task Force that Mayor put together. It will provide positive lasting impacts for victims as the first and formal permanent citywide group of stakeholders with relevant experience that can continue to inform city policy as it relates to domestic and sexual violence. As outlined in the ordinance, membership of this commission will be a collective voice of persons in power with lived experience, nonprofit organizations, institutions, systems, which together can facilitate an effective system of prevention and intervention that is responsive to the needs of victims and those that are at risk. If you're interested in becoming a commission member as a domestic violence and/or sexual assault provider or someone with lived experience, you can apply now at the City Clerk's Boards and Commissions website under the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Commission. You can also find my contact information on that website as well. For anyone out there who may be experiencing domestic violence or see a loved one going through it, please know that help is available 24/7, 365 days a year. Your community is here for you, and here at the City of Albuquerque, we recognize that the situation is difficult and scary. We see your bravery, and we are committed to making sure you have the resources you need to live a safe and healthy life. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, and we're going to hear from a number of other individuals involved in this. And another key component to what our city's trying to do and available for our community is Bev McMillan from the Family Advocacy Center. So Bev, come on up, and we forgot to do this before. There's a stool here. I so sorry, so let me set this up. We're going to help you out a little bit.
I appreciate that. Oh, that is a difference. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bev McMillan, and I'm with the Family Advocacy Center, but I want to take a moment of silence and bow our heads to remember those whose lives were taken through domestic violence. Thank you. As the manager of the Family Advocacy Center and a member of the Domestic Violence Task Force of 2019, the Family Advocacy Center is a one-stop shop that is committed to providing victims of domestic violence, of child abuse, sexual assault, and their families in a safe place, and assist in addressing and overcoming trauma that they may experience during the cycle of domestic violence. Domestic and sexual violence impacts millions of people of each year. Now, one important fact is during the 2 years between 2020 and 21, we saw over 13,000 clients. 8,100 clients actually came through in 2020. This year, we're actually tracking to over 6,000 clients that we will see. The Family Advocacy Center is a part of United Way of Central New Mexico's commitment to provide access to resources so the family can build upon their resiliency. Now, we have a call to action. That's why we need everyone, advocates, medical professionals, educators, survivors, researchers, and policymakers, law enforcement officers, business owners, students, and more to do the number one thing to stop domestic violence here in Albuquerque. The number one thing the city has just done, just this last week, was to affirm the priority of ending domestic violence and sexual assault with a collective voice. It's passing unanimously an ordinance that created a permanent domestic violence assault commission. What's the number one thing that you can do to address domestic violence? Be caring and consistent in adult's child's life. Talk to loved ones about domestic violence and oppression. Create a culture of consent in your home. Use social media to raise awareness among your peers and organizations. Reach out to your local domestic violence program to learn how you can help. Locate to validate a survivor of trauma. We encourage this challenge in our community to take the number one thing community pledge, which can be found on the Domestic Violence Awareness Project. So that number one thing that you say, my pledge, I, Beverly McMillan, pledge to raise the awareness of domestic violence. I understand changing one thing that can make a difference in my community and the movement to end domestic violence. I will use my voice to stand against victim blaming, discrimination, and the violence to end the stigma towards victims and survivors. I will listen to victims and survivors without judgment and respect their choices. I will share my number one thing boldly, proudly, and often to inspire others to make commitments to action against domestic violence. I will also encourage others to embrace their own number one thing to support victims of domestic violence and honor the advocates that work tirelessly to ensure the well-being of all survivors. By living this pledge, I am joining with the advocates across the country and gender-based violence in my home and in my community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bev. Now let's hear from our Chief of Police, Chief Harold Medina.
Thank you, Mayor. I first want to start with thanking Mayor Keller for creating this task force on domestic violence. I started with Albuquerque Police Department in 1995. It's easy for me to remember all the cases where we've arrested individuals for domestic violence, but it's hard for me to forget the times where we had to help victims. I think of the many times that I had to drive a victim to an undisclosed shelter to get safe from their offender, and the worry that the victim had of how they were going to survive financially, resource-wise. And I think that it's important that we recognize that the Albuquerque Police Department alone can't solve this problem. And bringing a task force together that brings all the partners to the table and ensures that we are working on this as a community problem is truly the way that we're finally going to help people get the resources and the help that they need. It's not just Thanksgiving holiday that is an issue. This is a year-round issue for the Albuquerque Police Department. And as I think back during the course of my career on the 14 years that I worked graveyard and the amount of calls that I took on Thanksgiving related to domestic violence, I can't help but think of the impact it's had all these years, whether it's Thanksgiving, officer-involved shootings, homicides. There seems to always be something occurring with domestic violence, and I haven't forgotten what it was like to be an officer and go to these calls, and that's why we're trying to give them the best resources possible to most appropriately respond. And that's why we're creating a new DART unit that is going to be based off of collateral duties for an officer, give them the most updated training, and make sure that we're dispatching the right people out there to help these individuals from the very beginning get in contact with all of the resources and all the help that they need, and to ensure that we build strong cases for prosecution. This isn't a typical call for service as when we go to Walmart and we arrest somebody for shoplifting. This is much more important. We must arrest an individual for the crime they have committed, but we also must ensure that the victim is connected with the resources and the help that they need and the support network to get them out of the situation that they're currently in. My hopes for the future is to have a domestic violence unit. We all know that we're strapped resources at the Albuquerque Police Department, And the Albuquerque Police Department will continue to evaluate the deployment of resources, what units we have and what units we put priorities on, and where we're able to create these collateral programs. I want to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank everybody who's bringing this awareness to the community. And you have the commitment from the Albuquerque Police Department. We will continue to ensure that we don't forget that it's more than just arresting an offender, and that we're also looking to make sure that we're setting our victims up for successfully exiting these dangerous situations and giving them the resources that they need. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Okay, now to hear more about the specific response to domestic violence, Commander George Vega.
Good morning, everyone. My name is George Vega, and I'm the commander of the Criminal Investigations Division for the Albuquerque Police Department. I want to take a minute to talk about the plan and steps we've taken to form a new collateral program for officers here in the police department. The program is called DART. That stands for Domestic Abuse Response Team. I would also like to thank our partners at the Crime Victims Reparation Commission for assisting us with this program. Partnering with CVRC, we have received a grant for $56,895. This money will be used to purchase 24 iPads, laptops, printers, training materials, and it's going to fund and is funding the salary of a part-time employee to help us track the DART program. We will be selecting 20 officers from the Field Services Bureau to join this program. We have a training scheduled to be completed on January 11th and 12th for these officers. Each officer will receive specialized training in the following: Domestic Violence Resource Center training, Emergency Restraining Order training taught by the Rape Crisis Center, Orders of Protection training by New Mexico Legal Aid, Domestic Violence Law taught by our District Attorney's Office, and Stalking training and Emergency Risk Firearm Protection Orders. After the training is complete, the officers will be sent back to their regular assignment. They will then be required to respond to domestic violence calls, where they will be utilizing the iPads to virtually link up with resources back at the Family Advocacy Center to provide them immediate resources and help. We expect that this program will speed up the time it takes for our victims to get services to protect them. I'd also like to point out that this is just the start of the program. We do plan on filling, as the year goes on, we're going to be bringing more officers into this collateral program. Thank you.
Now with more on training and technology and what we're doing to help domestic violence victims, Kyle Hartsock.
Just go 1 foot on, 1 foot off. I'll work on it.
It's gonna be a bit tall. My name's Kyle Hartsock. I'm the Deputy Commander in the Criminal Investigations Division. And as we talk about domestic violence, what we also want to talk about is how does what the police do and the advocates do, how does that also fit into the court system and the court processes? What we're going to be doing is reconnecting and better connecting what we do as police officers and how we investigate and how we help victims early on with advocacy and programs, and connect that to core programs that already exist to also help suspects and victims survive these things. When victims call police in a domestic violence, they do it for one reason: they don't feel safe, and they want to feel safe now. Police get there. We generally do a really good job at making them feel safe right then. But when we look at the near 6,000 cases that hit the court system a year for domestic violence in Bernalillo County, the prosecution success rate is very low. How do we continue to make a victim feel safe? By interacting with the systems that are already set up. That's from advocates, but that's also inside the court system. That's the prosecutor system. That's restraining order systems. We want to continue to make them feel safe and guide them through this. And we also have to understand too that domestic violence isn't always just intimate partners living in a home. It's also adult children against their parents. The adult children could be suffering from mental illness, drug abuse, and their parents are the victims. This is very complicated to call the police on your adult son and have him go to jail. So we want to be better at understanding the different types of domestic violence that come in, work with our partners at the DA's office, the Attorney General's office, and Metro Court and the District Court to feed better cases, stronger cases into those programs. Our advocates can better prepare the victims for what that's going to look like. A lot of victims don't want everybody to go to jail. That's okay. The courts don't want that either. We got to do a good job about explaining these things and setting them up for success, and make sure that we turn that trauma temperature down, and that we make them know that you will be safe, you're going to survive this entire process. So the chief has tasked me with helping to bolster those relationships with the courts, and that's something that we're also kicking off here very soon. And domestic violence will absolutely be a part of that initiative. Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, we also, as part of the changes that we made about 2 or 3 years ago with respect to the violence happening in our city, and also listening and respecting and honoring victims, has been to hire our own victims advocate. And so we want to hear from her now. Terry, come on up.
Hello, appreciate everybody being here today. So we now have a bona fide victims assistance unit within the police department. And the police department has always reached out to victims of domestic violence prior to now, and after an incident occurs, to make sure that victims are getting resources that they need. So that's been happening. We know that holidays cause a lot of stress for families, financial tension within, mixed with drugs and alcohol. It really can create an environment where abuse can occur. Sometimes potential victims or victims don't know where or how to access services. So the role is to make sure that we make sure that they know where they can go and how they can access. And a lot of times they don't realize that a lot of these resources are free of charge as well. So I'm here today to share with you what some of those resources are. Family Advocacy Center, it's located at 625 Silver Avenue. The second floor of that building is the Family Advocacy Center, referred to many times as the FAC. When you enter the Family Advocacy Center, if you turn to your left, that's where all of our providers are. And they are partnered with law enforcement. To your right, that's where the victim assistance advocates are. And we partnered together to make sure that we can serve victims of domestic violence and sexual assault brought together in one location. So it makes it easy for victims to come to one location and not have to go to multiple places to get the services that they need. The Family Advocacy Center works regular business hours, so people can walk in for services, or they can have an appointment with a provider or somebody from the law enforcement side. And the number for the Family Advocacy Center, is 505-243-2333. During the holidays and non-business hours, many of our providers have helplines that are available for victims. The Domestic Violence Resource Center, or sometimes known as DVRC, their phone number is 505-248-3165. Rape Crisis Center, their helpline is 505-266-7711, and SANE is also available, 505-884-7263. If you are just having difficulties and you need to talk to someone, you can call the Agora Crisis Helpline, and that number is 505-277-3031. We also brought some handouts, and they have all the numbers for you. APD field officers also have access to a domestic violence packet. And if they have to go to a scene, they can make sure that the victim has access to all of the resources that I just mentioned, plus much more. Officers are trained to be victim-centered and respond to all the domestic violence calls. Our APD Victim Assistance Unit is also available to help. The Victim Assistance Unit within APD can work with our partners. We can help with safety plans, emergency restraining orders, and other basic needs like food, clothes. We even have a food pantry and diapers and formula and things like that that families may need in an emergency, victims may need. Finally, everyone should educate themselves, and if you don't need the services yourself, you may know someone else that does. It's important to know what warning signs are when someone might be suffering from being in a dysfunctional relationship. And also, for victims, it would be good during the holidays to confide in a trusted friend or a relative, and that person check in on you, or you check in with them as well. 6 weeks ago, someone that I love walked into the Family Advocacy Center for some support, and she reached out to me, didn't know what to do. I told her to come to the FAC. She got the resources that she needed. You just don't know when it's going to happen to you or someone you love or someone you care about or your neighbor. So thank you all again for being here and getting this information out.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, we're grateful for our partners in this and for all the folks at the city who work on this issue each and every day. And we know that people deserve to feel safe in their own home. And we've got to keep doing our part to create a system that supports victims and their families and helps prevent others from experiencing domestic violence. And I think the pledge spoke to a lot of different ways in which each one of us can do that here in the city of Albuquerque. I want to reiterate the hotline number to call, 1-800-SAFE. And of course, if there's an emergency situation, to call 911. Now, I also just want to reiterate what APD is announcing here today. This new DART program is modeled after what we've done for CIT. So the idea is, and I know there's a lot of acronyms there, but the idea is we've got a set of specially trained officers to deal with crisis intervention, but that typically has to do with mental and behavioral health situations. And now we're going to have a mirror program for domestic violence and domestic abuse, where we have a collection of officers who are trained to specifically respond to those calls. And there's a tie in there to data. So when you heard that announcement about the sort of back end with laptops and things like that, that is because of the tracking that we need to do, because domestic violence cases are very difficult to prosecute. And so this is a big step forward. Actually, it's probably the most significant step since the creation of the FAC. And so for us, we're optimistic about how when this gets up and running next year, it's going to have a much stronger impact than we can currently do right now with respect to this issue, but we're getting very close to it. Lastly, this is a reflection of a general direction at the Albuquerque Police Department to reallocate resources to where it is needed most and where it is more effective. And so we're only able to do these collateral programs. Collateral is also another word for specially trained overtime. We're only able to do these if we have more officers in the field and more officers for flexible deployment. And so you will see us continuing to use this strategy for the biggest issues facing our city. With that, we'll take a few questions and I can direct it to the relevant expert.
I have a question. I think this was kind of touched on, but can we just lay out the theory of why there's more domestic violence over the holidays? And I don't know if this is a question for, but.
Either of you two want to, well, certainly, I know we could all do it, but.
Sure.
Isis, go ahead.
And thank you. What's your name?
Elise, Kaplan.
Elise. Okay, great to meet you. So typically there's uptick in all holidays. There's more tension, financial struggles, especially around Thanksgiving, Christmas holiday. Sports watching also increases a lot of domestic violence, abuse, and sexual assault in holidays. So that's just a short, quick narrative about why it increases.
And alcohol consumption.
That's a big one.
Throw that in there too.
Thanks, Mayor.
Yeah.
Alcohol and substance abuse also increases.
Thank you. One other thing, if you mentioned sports, our number one busiest day is the day after Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
We see more clients because alcohol was involved, maybe there was betting involved, we're losing money, my team lost, and I need to go home and fight someone. And that's where it ends up, so the family actually suffers behind that. But that is a key factor.
questions?
Can we go in a little bit of depth on the difference between regular restraining orders and the emergency restraining orders, kind of the timeline that's different between the two?
Mm-hmm.
Just go on one
Yeah.
foot.
1 foot in.
There you go, there you go, you got it, you got it. I know.
No, so a regular restraining order, it's a great question. The difference of a restraining order and an emergency restraining order is a normal restraining order is only during the business hours of the court, Monday through Friday. It's banking hours, kind of 8:30 to 4:30. Sometimes that window closes early. They're on a lunch break, and you got to wait in line. So it's that. Emergency restraining orders, police work with our DVRC advocates, our own interdepartment advocates, and we can get orders done at 1 in the morning. So we can be at someone's house in the middle of the night, and there are certain powers granted to police and systems set up that we can issue a restraining order right then. We can serve it to the party who's right in front of us, so we can say you know about it and give it to them right away. So it's much more effective to make the victim, again, feel safe right away and skip out on that court process. It's usually only for really hyper dangerous situations that might have just occurred. That's generally what we reserve it for.